What we have in our previous studies, when we looked at yesterday, we had an 84-year window. Right, we're back again. That's great. We had an 84-year window with the white horse, and this allowed our brothers and sisters to bend their tongues and send out of their mouths those sweet arrows of the words of the covenant. A beautiful time period as far as the Roman world was concerned with respect to peace and tranquility. By no means did that negate the persecution, of course, that came on our brothers and sisters with some of those Roman emperors. But they would go forth conquering and to conquer. Would they bring down the pagan Roman world? Well, in our study this morning, they're going to cry, how much longer before the effective work of the bow benders will be evidenced in the world and this pagan Roman Empire disappear? How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge them that dwell on the earth? So in a primary sense, our brothers and sisters were praying for the end of men like him, Diocletian, that dwelt on the earth. That's what they were praying for. And therefore that work of the bowbenders was going forth. It swept through the red horse and the black horse and the pale horse until finally the pagan Roman world was rolled away like a scroll. So 84 years of peace. And then that would see us plummet into 31 years of civil war, where the Machaira, the assassin's dagger, would flash with alacrity and rivers of blood in the Roman world. 2,000 people a day. It was not uncommon to see disappear in the city of Rome. Such was the awful bloodshed and those that scrabbled to get to the top, killing one another. Well, brothers and sisters, 5 emperors in the first seal, 5 emperors in the second seal. Now we go from this awful civil war and bloodshed into a terrible state in the Roman world, where we now come to the black horse. And we have 4 emperors in the black horse: Caracalla, Macrinus, Elagabalus, and Severus Alexander. And therefore, brothers and sisters and young people, we read in the record with respect to this third seal, this black horse, we read these words. And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third living one say, enthusiastically, energetically, John, stand over with us, you belong with us, look, be a spectator, and look at what God is doing with respect to judgment on the pagan Roman world. Come and see. And John says, I beheld, and lo, a black horse. And he that sat upon him had a pair of balances in his hand. And I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 living ones say, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny. But see thou hurt not the oil and the wine. That is a remarkable statement. Wait till you see the outworking, the accuracy in the outworking of that sign law, which we'll look at in a moment, as it outworked in history in the Roman Empire. A measure of wheat for a penny, 3 measures of barley for a penny. But don't act unjustly against the oil and the wine. We ask the question first, black. Is black a fitting colour for this epoch in the Roman world? Well, brothers and sisters, we could look at a number of Old Testament quotations, but Job 30 will do. And if we went to Job 30, which we won't, I'll put it on the screen, you can if you like, but if you go to Job 30, brothers and sisters, young people, if you want to read a chapter in the Bible that enthuses you and lifts you up and gives you a spring in your step, don't read Job 30. It's a depressing chapter. It's an awful chapter, brothers and sisters. There's poor old Job. Now look at what happens. Is black a fitting colour for this part of the Roman Empire? Well, look at the context of Job and you'll see that spill in to Revelation chapter 6. I mean, have a look. You may not see the text, but you can see the colours. Have a look at this. But now, Job says, before I had honour. I had honour before. But look at me now. I am the object of scorn. And then you come over here in verse 9. But now look at me. Before, I had respect among young people. Young people would come up to me and say, "Oh, Uncle Job, how are you? Can we give you a cup of coffee? Are you okay? Can we listen to you? You have so much wisdom, Uncle Job. Oh, you can bring words to us that will inspire us." That was what happened before. But now he says, look at me. Before I had respect among young people, but now I am the object of a taunting song, and young people are singing those taunting songs about me. And then you spill down into verse 16 and Job says, look at me now. Before I could run with the young people, I could play soccer out on the soccer field, I could spring with them, I could open up the curtains in the morning, suck in the morning air, just bathe in the morning sunlight, but now I am at the door of death. All right, I'll go to God. And when he goes to God, he feels God has abandoned him. I might as well die. I am black. And you see the context: evil, darkness, mourning, weeping. My skin is black. And that, brothers and sisters, is what's captured here in this third seal in Revelation 6. Out there in the Roman world, people were in mourning. They were in terrible distress. There was an intense depression of mind. Why? What brought this on in the Roman world? Well, it was all about injustice. It was all about balances. It was all about taxation. Now, brothers and sisters, if you lived in this time, young people, if you lived in this time of the Roman world, the balances would have been very, very familiar to you. I mean, look at those coins. I mean, there we have balances. It was very common. I mean, Rome, in the second seal, boasted in the Pax Romana, we guarantee peace, but they didn't. And here we've got this coin here, Equitas, the personification of fairness. There was no fairness in the Roman world. And Equitas is that word from which we get the word equity. There was no equity there. It was a terrible time of heavy taxation, which brought this terrible depression of mind and mourning throughout the Roman Empire. Now, what you read is this with respect to this injustice and this amazing little statement: a measure of wheat for a penny and 3 measures of barley. Be careful about this. I heard a voice in the midst of the 4 living ones say. Now, this voice is not the people out in the provinces crying to their pagan gods, "Oh, we're in mourning, we're in deep depression. Why have you done this to us, pagan gods?" This is not the people out in the provinces. This is the voice of the judiciary. This is a proclamation of those who were in control. This is a proclamation of those who were in charge and issued laws and decrees. Now, you can see that in a number of passages in the Old Testament. Ezra 1 and verse 1 will do. This idea of a judicial law that goes forth like a voice. Well, we read in Ezra chapter 1 and verse 1 these words. Now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of Yahweh by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, Yahweh stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation. Now, if you looked in your margin, it has caused a voice. So from the judiciary, from those in power, a voice went out through his kingdom. And therefore, young people, brothers and sisters, these were the decrees and the laws that were issued and then carried out by those in authority. So they started from the top, the law went out, that was carried out by those, and down it went. Awful period of time. But you know, sometimes you read in the midst of gloom and doom and blackness and shadows, sometimes you read a little section in the Bible that in amongst all of the gloom and doom, you read something that just gives you a lift. And that little lift is right there amongst all the mourning and depression, amongst all the blackness. This judicial voice, this taxation decree, there's going to be taxes, went right out in the midst of the 4 living ones. Brothers and sisters, that tells us that the work of the bowbenders was very, very effective. The midst of the 4 living ones. So wherever taxation went, and taxation went right throughout the Roman Empire, nobody escaped taxation. And wherever taxation went, this law went, there were our brothers and sisters all over the empire. How encouraging is that? The bow bender, the 84 years, that window had been very, very effective. And all over the empire, where taxation went, nobody escaped, were our brothers and sisters. How encouraging was that? Well, have a look at this amazing statement, this voice that went forth from the judiciary. A measure of wheat for a penny, 3 measures of barley for a penny, but don't you act unjustly against the oil and the wine. Now you can read history and you might be searching, well, who said that? Was it Caracalla? No. Was it Macrinus? No. Was it Elagabalus? No. Was it Severus Alexander? No. Was it Commodius? No, he was too busy being Hercules anyway. He had no time to say things like that. So brothers and sisters, this wasn't a statement that was made by an emperor. This is a sign law. This is a little statement put there by the revelator as a sign to show us how bad things were in this black period of the Roman Empire. Now, we don't have time to go through this very quickly, but if you went and had a look at Exodus and Exodus chapter 4, and you read through there, you would see, brothers and sisters, all the way through here, in the context of Moses and Aaron, all the way through here, you see voice, 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 mouth, say, speak, speak, words, mouth, 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 all the way through, as Moses is going to go, or Aaron and Moses are going to go and confront Pharaoh. And in the context of voice, 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 you see a sign. Verse 8, it shall come to pass, if they will not believe thee, neither hearken to the voice of the sign. The voice of the first sign. So you've got sign and voice. This is the idea that comes out in Revelation 6. And then, of course, you then have a look at verse 9, and it says, it shall come to pass, if they will not believe also the 2 signs, neither hearken unto thy voice. Signs and voice put together. The chapter begins with voice, and the section ends with the rod in thine hand, wherein thou shalt do signs. So using that little concept in Exodus chapter 4, and I'll give you some copies of these slides for those that want to colour that in a little bit later on. So we're going to flick on to the next one. So please don't say bad things about me. Why didn't he leave that on there a bit longer? So I'm flicking across, but we'll give them to you later on. So brothers and sisters, a sign law written by the revelator to show us how bad things were. What does this mean? A measure of wheat for a penny and 3 measures of barley, and so on. Well, in the Greek, we have not a measure of wheat, we have a koinix, which was the measure. So a koinix of wheat, a denarius, and 3 koinixes of barley, a denarius. But the oil and the wine thou mayest not act unjustly by. Now, I want you to just think about this for a moment. This is a 24-year period, this black horse, 24 years. Now, what we've got is we've got wheat and barley, and then we've got oil and wine. This is, if you know anything about the planting and harvesting calendar of Israel, you'll know that they harvested the wheat and the barley first, and then at the end of the planting or the harvesting season, they harvested the grapes and the olives. Now, what God is showing us here is, in this 24-year period, at the beginning of this kind of like harvesting period, and there were harvesting going on in the Roman Empire, let me see, not farming, but tax farming. Lots of tax farming going on. So at the beginning of this 24-year period, it was awful with the wheat and the barley. But as you get toward the end of this, like farming, harvesting, it gets better and there is relief. I'll show you how that works in a minute with respect to the history of the time. Now, this koinix of wheat, the denarius. Now, if we were to go, which we won't, but if we were to go to Matthew 20 and verse 2, we know the parable that a person worked and laboured all day, and at the end of the labour for one day, they got a penny or they got a denarius. So a day's labour and you would get a denarius. Now, brothers and sisters, at the end of this, and young people, you would get the relief that would come. Now, this denarius, what we read with respect to the measure of wheat for a denarius, the measure would be as much as would support a man of moderate appetite for one day. So if you've got a koinex of wheat, if you've got 3 koinexes of barley, barley was the poor man's food, so you could get more barley for the denarius than you could for the wheat. But if you've got this measure of wheat and you paid a day's wages, that would sustain you if you had a moderate appetite. Some of us in this room have got moderate appetites. Some. So, brothers and sisters, now let's just think about this. A day's wages, and with your day's wages, you're a labourer, you could buy enough food to satisfy you for one day. How much does a labourer earn? I've been retired for a few years, so I'm kind of like out of the loop. How much would a labourer earn a day? $150, $200 a day? A labourer? How much? $30 an hour? $240, $250 a day. I'm going back to work. Well, let's just make it easy for our calculations. Let's go $200 a day. Right. You work as a labourer. This is in the time of the Roman world. You work for a day and you get $200. That $200 would be spent on your food to satisfy you for a day. You've got a wife and she eats as much as you. Then you've got $400 a day. You've got 2 children. Let's not give them too much food. Let's halve your intake. Let's give the children $50 each a day. So that's $200 for you, $200 for your wife, and $100 for your 2 children. It's $500 a day. Now you times that by 7. What's that? $3,500? $3,500 a week. Who goes down to Woolies and Coles with $3,500 and fills up the shopping basket? Who does that? That's what you'd have to do, brothers and sisters. That was what you would have to do. That's how bad it was. It wasn't that there was no fertility in the ground. It wasn't that there was no rain coming down. People walked off the farms because they could not afford it. They were taxed and taxed and taxed. It wasn't worth growing. $3,500 a week just for the grocery bill. That was awful, brothers. But let's show you how that was amazingly ameliorated at the end of this 24-year period. Well, brothers and sisters, here we are at the end of this 24-year period. The last emperor that would come along would relieve all that taxation and take away the burden of that $3,500 a week food bill. Well, here they are. Here are your 4 emperors of the 3rd seal: Caracalla, Macrinus, Elagabalus, and Severus Alexander. Well, brothers and sisters, we've had Commodus in the 2nd seal, the fruitcake, the Hercules running around the arena. He was bad. This man here, Caracalla, he was an absolute animal. If Commodus was an idiot, this man was an animal, an absolute animal. He was a beast. In fact, they called him the savage beast of Ausonia. If you were walking down the street and you bumped into Caracalla, you say, "You're a brute." He'd say, "Oh, thank you very much. You have a nice day too." He loved it, brothers and sisters. He absolutely loved it. He was the man that was a tax madman. He would tax anything. He would tax that piano for taking up space. He'd tax that hymn book for laying down there because it's taking up a little bit of space. He'd tax your children. What are kids doing here? They shouldn't be. I'm going to tax children all over. He taxed anything. And the people out in the provinces said, "He's introduced a city tax. We're out in the provinces. We don't have to pay our taxes." Caracalla said, "Oh, yes, you do." He said, "I'm now making the city limits the limits of the boundary of the empire. So the whole Roman Empire is now the city of Rome, and you're all citizens of the city of Rome, therefore you're paying your city tax." That was Caracalla, brothers and sisters. But I tell you this, even though Caracalla was an absolute animal and a beast and a tax madman, he did not want to persecute the brothers and sisters. He wasn't interested in persecuting the Christians, and I'll show you how impactful that is in a moment. Well, there was Caracalla, and there was Macrinus. Now, Caracalla, brothers and sisters, he was, now there are the emperors of the 2nd seal there, and you'll remember Commodus, the Hercules man running around the arena. There's the virtuous pagan, there's Pertinax that tried to straighten it out. There's Dius Julianus, the old bloke that bought the empire, couldn't rule the empire to save his life. And then you remember Septimus Severus. He was one of the generals out of the provinces that marched in because they'd cut his head off. Right. Septimus Severus was the father of Geta and Caracalla. These two boys were brothers, and they ruled together conjointly for a number of years. Well, Caracalla, as mad and beastly as he was, he tried to poison his dad several times, Septimus Severus. But he didn't succeed. His dad got old and died. But Caracalla poisoned his brother. That's the kind of man that he was, brothers and sisters. Well, here was Caracalla, not interested in persecuting the Christians, just tax. And he was interested in poisoning his dad, by the way, and poisoning his brother. Well, Macrinus came along and bumped Caracalla off. Macrinus didn't last very long because the army went, we want somebody virtuous. We want to look around for a bit more virtue in our leaders. And so they looked over toward the east, and they saw a fellow over in the east, and he was a priest of the sun, Elagabalus. So they thought, we'll get him. He's kind of like religious, pagan, but religious. We'll bring him over, Elagabalus, and maybe he'll bring some virtue into the Roman world. Brothers and sisters, if Commodus was a fruitcake and Caracalla was a beast, Elagabalus was a debauched sensualist. They put him in there thinking he had some sort of virtue because he was a priest of the sun. He was a debauched sensualist. And what this Elagabalus did in private and in public embarrassed hard Roman soldiers. The Roman soldiers out in the provinces, you know what Roman soldiers out in the provinces must have seen and got up to? When they heard about the exploits of this man in private and in public, they were embarrassed. And they said, we've got to get rid of him. We've got to look around for someone with real virtue. And so what they did, they got Elagabalus, they cut his body into little bits and dragged the bits through the city. Nice time in this black horse. And they looked around and they saw this 17-year-old Severus Alexander. He's the one. God said he's the one. Because God had that sign law written. And so they installed Severus Alexander. And when Severus Alexander came in, now we're toward the end of the planting cycle and harvesting cycle. At the beginning, awful taxation. Wheat and barley, a koinix, $3,500 a week for your grocery bill. And as you get toward the end of this cycle, this man comes in. And the first thing he did, brothers and sisters and young people, he reduced taxation not by 1/30th. He reduced taxation to 1/30th. What's a 30th of 3,500? I've got a whiteboard here. Andrew tried everything to get a whiteboard. Stayed up half the night wandering around the campsite. I was thrilled with the energy and enthusiasm, but totally disappointed with the outcome. So, what's a 30th of 3,500? You can do it. You can write it on a piece of paper. You're struggling without a calculator, yeah? What's a 30th? 30th of 3,500? 1/30th. Who's got it?
It's just under $120.
$120. So here's $3,500, Dale. Just get the specials at Coles. To 120 grocery bill. That is the difference between don't act unjustly against the oil and the wine. In comes Severus Alexander, brothers and sisters, and reduces taxation. Reduces your grocery bill from $3,500 to $120. What an amazing sign law that was. Well, brothers and sisters, this is what the historians say about this period. Remember how we said Caracalla was an animal? Brute. Tried to poison his dad, poisoned his brother. Well, this is what the historians say, but he wasn't interested in persecuting the Christians. They say this about this period. The growing cost of the armed forces and the inflation which accompanied it compelled the emperors to increase taxes and to invent new ones. But, look at this. The spirit of the times was, moreover, very susceptible to the message of Christianity, which made great advances. And a voice went out in the midst of the living ones. That's what God says. And that's what the historians, what an amazing thing. Is God in control? Were the angels at work? Oh yes. What an amazing thing. Well, brothers and sisters, worse is now to come. We go from a peaceful period, the 84-year window, plummeting to 31 years of civil war with blood, into this black mourning, distressful period where taxation was everywhere, only to be relieved by Severus Alexander at the end of that 24-year planning period. But now we're going to plummet. 5 emperors in the first seal, 5 emperors in the second seal, 4 emperors in the third seal, and 23 in the fourth. And 39 would-be emperors on the way. In the first 50 years of this seal, 39 would claim to be emperors, and every one of those would-be 39 claimants to the throne died violently. The fourth seal, the pale horse, and the badge of the rider was the name death. And the grave followed. This is awful. This Roman Empire, this horse, is shuffling along, taking his last skinny breath, and is about to expire. And the brothers and sisters are going to cry to God, how long? How much longer? We've seen all of these events. How much longer will those who dwell on the earth be not avenged? And that's coming very soon. Well, here we are, brothers and sisters, young people, with our fourth seal. And we read in verse 7 these words. And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living one. This is the last time. 4 times this would happen. The fourth and final occasion, John, come over here, stand with us, you belong with us, be a spectator, and look what's now happening to the Roman world. And I looked, he says in verse 8, and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat upon him was Death, and the grave followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth. Now listen to the detail. It's not a throwaway line by God. Oh, it was bad. No. Listen to the detail. To kill with a sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. There's detail here. And you see what happens to this time of the Roman world. Well, the pale horse, brothers and sisters. Some would have this word in their margins. It's a Greek word, chloros, from which we get the word chlorophyll, that green substance that plants make. And the word chlorine comes from this word chloros. Chlorine, when you see it as a gas, you shouldn't be close to it if you can see it as a gas. It's a paley green gas. In fact, the word chloros here is only used 4 times in the New Testament. 4 times. Other than this time here, it's used in Mark and chapter 6 and verse 39, when they sat down on the green grass. It's used in Revelation 8 and verse 7, when Alaric and the Visigoths came down and burnt all the green grass. It's used in Revelation 9 and verse 4, and talking about the Saracens. Hurt not anything that's green. So you have this idea, pale is a sickly, greenish, yellowish colour. A fitting colour to see the Roman Empire starting to expire. Because sadly, it's the colour that some people go just before they're about to die. That is a very apt description of the condition of the Roman world at this time. Well, brothers and sisters, Gibbon says this, just a succinct sentence about this period of the Roman world. Gibbon says, the animating health and vigour of the empire were fled. He wasn't reading Eureka. He wasn't reading Revelation 6, but this is a historian. Just to describe this period of the Roman world, just the animating health, and there it is, there's not much health and animation there. There was with the white horse, but not there. The animating health and vigour of the empire were fled. A succinct statement by historians, and of course, Bible prophecy is the mould, and history is poured into the mould God has predetermined, not the other way around. History confirming what God had already set in place. Well, brothers and sisters, power was given unto the grave and death over the fourth part of the earth. Now, we looked at this yesterday. We made the point, just establishing the point, that the earth was the Roman Empire. Do you remember Diocletian He was the last emperor of the 4th seal, the first emperor of the 5th seal, Diocletian. And for ease of administration, he divided his empire into 4 prefectures, a tetrarchy, and we looked at that yesterday. So what we're reading now in the 4th seal is power was given with death and the grave over the 4th part of the earth. So brothers and sisters and young people, judgment is going to be brought home to the very heart and soul of the empire in preparation for the final overthrow in the 6th seal, the nerve centre. And once that happened in that 4th part, the rest of the empire would tumble like a series of dominoes. Look at the detail. Power was given to the grave and death. To what? To kill with the sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. To kill with the sword. Now, we already looked at the word sword in the 2nd seal was Machaira, the assassin's dagger. We briefly introduced you to, some of you introduced you to the Rhomphaia, which is the large Thracian sword of judgment in this 4th seal. So this is the sword. God is going to kill this part of the empire with the Rhomphaia sword. What does that mean? Why does God place that here? What's the relevance? Prophecy and history. We alluded to this, albeit very briefly. The first emperor of this 4th seal, the first emperor of these 23 emperors, was that man there who happened to come from Thrace. Thrace was circled there. His name was Maximin. Brothers and sisters and young people, he was a monster. He was an absolute monster. He was 8.5 feet tall. Now, to me, that's a monster. Could you imagine me standing next to him? And up he'd go. 8.5 feet tall. He was a monster. I don't know whether it's true or not. Can't believe everything you read on the internet, but some say that he was so big all over the place that he used to wear his wife's bracelet on his fat finger. Could you imagine that? A bracelet on... He was a monster. He was a Thracian peasant walking around. I don't know whether you walk naturally if you're 8.5 feet tall. Maybe he loped around the place. But there he was, walking around, this Thracian peasant. He is going to become, this Thracian peasant, he's going to become the first emperor of the 4th seal period. But he's got to climb the ladder. He's going to climb it pretty quickly because he's 8.5 feet tall. You can take 3 or 4 steps as you go up. He's going to climb the ladder of success. Now, brothers and sisters, this is what happened. Interesting little historical stories to see how God and the angels were working. Now, do you remember? You do, of course you do, because you've got good memories. Do you remember Septimus Severus, the one coming in from the provinces in the 2nd seal, who liked Pertinax, whose head was gone? Do you remember him coming in? Well, he had his 2 sons, Geta and Caracalla. Now, Septimus Severus was wanting to put on a birthday party for his son Geta. And so he put a birthday party on in Thrace, and they set up some military games in honour of Septimus Severus' son Geta. So they've got these military games going on in Thrace. Now while Septimus Severus is putting these military games on, there's this Maximin, this 8.5 foot bloke walking around, this Thracian peasant, while all this is going on. And he comes up to Severus and he says, I'd like to get a coronal wreath. Wreath. I'd like to get a coronal wreath. And Septimus Severus says, yeah, what do you want to go? He says, I want to go in the wrestling. Could you imagine that? 8.5 foot. I want to go in the wrestling. So he goes in the wrestling and he takes one on over his shoulder, over his shoulder, easy head over his shoulder. 16! Like 6 guns. So 16! And then he looks around for some sort of recognition by the emperor, Septimus Severus. He's gone. He jumped on his horse and gone. So he starts running after him. I want to be seen. Who wouldn't see you? 8.5 foot tall. So he's running after Septimus Severus. He said, how'd you like that? And he said, yeah, it wasn't bad. He said, can you do it again? Sure. So back he goes into the wrestling. 7 more. He was on the move. And he was. And when he came to power, brothers and sisters and young people, when he finally got there, this Thracian peasant, if you said anything about his heritage, if you said anything about the fact that he had no blue blood in his veins, you're just an old Thracian peasant, he killed you. Not only did he kill you, anyone associated with you. Brothers and sisters, when you read the history, he just killed and killed and killed, even if there was a whisper about the lack of his blue blood in his veins. No one caught him. He was a very long Thracian sword, 8.5 feet long. What an amazing thing. God just happens to put that in with respect to that prophetic statement for us history. Well, brothers and sisters, then not only would there be this first emperor coming in who would use this Thracian sword with celerity, you then have hunger and death. This is what Gibbon says about this time period of hunger and death. Gibbon says famine is almost always followed by epidemic diseases. Famine, taxation, that's the third seal. That's the black horse. So the result, the spillover from the black horse comes into the pale horse period. The effect of scanty and unwholesome food. That's a carryover from the black horse period. Other causes must, however, have contributed to the furious plague, which from the year 250 to 260, 15 years of plague, raged without interruption in every province, in every city, almost in every family of the, brothers and sisters, during this period of the fourth seal, half the Roman Empire perished. Half perished. You imagine that. What's the population of Australia? 25 million? Could you imagine in 15 years, 13 or 14 million people dying? You do that on a yearly basis, and then a monthly basis, and a weekly basis. That is awful, brothers and sisters. That was terrible. Disease and famine. And therefore, not only that, they had to contend with the Thracian madman of Maximin, the 8.5-foot giant. Not only would they have to deal with the hunger and death as a carryover from the black horse, but also the beasts of the earth. What does that mean? Well, I mean, if you went to Titus in chapter 1 and verse 12, those who were on Crete, they're slow bellies, always liars, evil beasts, Paul says. There were no beasts on Crete. There were no animals on. Human beings took their place. So these were evil beasts. These were people who were slow-bellied and liars. You couldn't trust them. Well, these beasts, brothers and sisters, in Revelation are talking about the barbarians, talking about the Germanic barbarians that would sweep across the Rhine and the Danube. And even the Persians were deemed barbarians by the Romans. And the barbarous Persians would come across and they would inflict terrible depredations on the fair cities of Alexandria and of Antioch. Beasts all around the empire. Thracian swords, hunger, disease, famine, and beast. No wonder it was a pale horse. No wonder it was a chloritic horse. The colour just before death. The Roman Empire is about to expire. And there we are. There are the 23 emperors of the fourth seal. There's your great 8.5-foot Thracian peasant. And right down here at the end, the last emperor of the fourth seal is Diocletian. Diocletian. And what the historians tell us with respect to this period, this 68 years of death, murder, disease and famine, this is what they say. For nearly a half a century since the death of Severus Alexander. Do you remember him? 17-year-old. 1/3. He reduced taxation to 1/3. For nearly a half a century, for nearly 50 years since the death of the last emperor of the third seal, the Roman world had been on the verge of chaos. And the consequences were incalculable. The empire emerged from this period in a state of collapse. And wherever the barbarians, the beasts, had passed, they left behind waste and ruin, while the peasants, whose fields and homes were ravaged, had fled. And here comes, in this period, the last emperor, brothers and sisters, Diocletian. He was the greatest emperor to sit upon the throne in Rome since Octavian Augustus, the Caesar at the birth of Christ. Not since the Caesar at the birth of Christ had there been a greater emperor than Diocletian, the last emperor of the fourth seal, the first emperor of the fifth seal. And this Diocletian is going to be now to do something about what was going on in the Roman Empire. Now, brothers and sisters, if you were pagans, living in the Roman Empire, you'll be saying, where are our pagan gods? What is going on? We've had black horses, we've had red horses, we've had pale horses, we've had crisis after crisis after crisis, taxation, death, beasts. Where are our pagan gods? Have our pagan gods lost their potency? Or maybe you will be saying as pagans, or maybe the Christian God is a potent punisher, and he was. And Diocletian comes on the throne, the greatest emperor since Octavian Augustus, and he's going to get rid of the crisis. He's going to bring back the glory to Rome. He's going to embellish the temples of Rome. And in the process, he's going to get rid of the Christians. Because his understudy, Galerius, was saying, it's the Christians, it's the Christians. We go in to read the entrails, we can't see anything in the kidneys. We can't see anything in the livers. Our crystal ball's all black. It's the Christians, it's the Christians. You get rid of the Christians and you'll get rid of the crises. And so Diocletian capitulated. Therefore, brothers and sisters, we have now the fifth seal. He's going to inflict terrible depredations on the... He's a funny man, was Diocletian in some ways. Funny man. He couldn't understand the Christians. He did not want to persecute them in the first place. He didn't want to persecute them because he knew that if you persecute the Christians, they become more intense in their bow bending. The more you persecute them, the more powerful they become with their preaching. He knew that. He wanted to embrace them. Inclusivity. Eh? What a word. Eh? Inclusivity. Let's bring them all in. I've got 100 gods. I'm happy to have your Christian God as part of a great pantheon of gods. I mean, we go down to Egypt and we worship the god Isis. They come up here. What's wrong with these He could not stand or tolerate fundamentalism. What's wrong with them? Why don't they go to our marketplaces and buy our trinkets? Why don't they go to our basketball or baseball matches and stand up and salute the flag and sing the national anthem? Why don't they involve themselves in our worship? Every time they worship their God with that sincerity and that veracity, they are condemning me and my life. He could not stand and he could not understand fundamentalism. Therefore, brothers and sisters, he was going to remove Christianity from the face of the earth. And therefore, we open up the fifth seal in the closing moments of our study this morning. And having a look at my watch, good. We're going very, very well. And how are you all going out there? With all the big breakfasts some of you had, I am surprised you've made the distance thus far. Good. All right. The fifth seal. Diocletian, to get rid of the crisis and bring back the glory to pagan Rome, he's going to get rid of the Christians. So we read, verse 9 through 10. And when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which, is doctrine important? I was having a conversation with a group of young people not so long ago in this city. I could not believe it. They were sitting in the audience and they were saying, no, we don't think doctrine's important. All doctrine seems to bring is contention, arguing over this and that. Just love. Makes you so sad, doesn't it? What does that do to our brothers and sisters who had to stand up? All Diocletians, just put a pinch of incense, that's all, and you're going to live. No. Faithful witnesses. And you're hearing some people say doctrine is not important. Heck, I left churches 50 years ago, brothers. I walked out the Church of Christ because that's their attitude. Not important. Walked into the ecclesial hall at Woodville. Wow, this is a serious group of people who love their Bible. They were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? The souls under the altar. When he had opened the fifth seal, I saw the souls under the altar. Well, we know our Lord Jesus Christ, in Hebrews 13 and verse 10, is our altar. We know in Leviticus chapter 4 and verse 7 that when they slew the sin offering, they poured the blood under the altar. We know in Galatians chapter 3 that if we're baptised into Christ, we're put on Christ. We are Christ's. And therefore, Brother Thomas brings those three quotations together in Eureka in a lovely little sentence, and he says this. In Eureka, Volume 2, page 238. He says, when the faithful in Christ Jesus, those within the altar, when they die and they return to the parent earth without violence, they are underneath the altar sleeping in Jesus. But if they're made to lie underneath the altar by the blood-shedding cruelty of the enemy, their souls are said, as in the language of the fifth seal, to cry with a great or loud voice for the judicial vengeance on the murderers who poured out their soul blood unto death. That was our brethren. What a lovely little sentence, just wrapping those three quotations together as Brother Thomas does in Eureka. Well, brothers and sisters, we've made the point in our first class yesterday. There were the first four seals. A living one, a living one, a living one, and a living one. Here, there are no living ones in the fifth seal. And we said, didn't we? And the reason that is because when God looked down from heaven, the apostasy was growing and growing and growing, and the purity, those preserving the doctrine and their way of life, were becoming less and less. We made that point. Now I want to emphasise and I want to embellish that point here and prove that point here in this fifth seal. No living ones. Now look at these two quotations to reinforce the fact that there is no justification now to introduce the living ones, because there wasn't a significant number of our true brothers and sisters in the Roman Empire as we approach AD 300. We don't have to turn this up. You know the verse very well. Think about this. Matthew 5 verse 13. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt hath lost its savour, wherewith will the earth be salted?" White horse, salty earth. Red horse, sure, civil war. But our brothers and sisters, bow bending, sending out the sweet words of the covenant, salty earth. The black horse period, salty earth. And a voice went out in the midst of the living ones. The pale horse period, a little less salty. And as you get past that fourth period, brothers and sisters, the earth is losing the potency of the saltiness of the purity of the gospel of Christ. And then, to cement that, you then come to this verse here, brothers and sisters, Revelation 6 and verse 11. Just turn that one up. We haven't done a lot of Bible turning. We've done no Bible turning. Just quickly turn that up. You probably have already got it on your laps. Revelation 6 and verse 11. Just want to pause for a minute or two, just looking at this little statement here to show to you that less salty, and therefore the Roman earth was going to be rolled away. Because the potency of the true brothers and sisters was becoming diminished by the overshadowing arch of the Roman apostasy. Well, when you come to Revelation 6 and verse 11, as we have on the screen, no living ones. Now we read this in verse 11. "And white robes were given unto every one of them. And it was said unto them that they should rest a little season until," now look at this, "their fellow servants also and their brethren, that they should be killed as they were, should be fulfilled." Now, brothers and sisters, the Diaglott says this, and Brother Thomas zooms in on this in Eureka, that they should rest for a little season until both their fellow servants and their brethren should be killed. Who are these fellow servants? Are they the brethren? Are the brethren the fellow servants? Oh, I know, when you go later on in the Apocalypse, they're both interchanged. Not here. Not here. And this gives weight to the fact that no living ones are introduced, because our brothers and sisters are in the decline. Brothers and sisters, the fellow servants here, Brother Thomas in Eureka calls these fellow servants, he calls them primitive Catholics. He calls them Laodicean Christadelphians. He makes the point, he says, which is true, all Christadelphians are Christians. True? But not all Christians are Christadelphians. All brethren are fellow servants, but not all fellow servants are brethren. And these fellow servants, brothers and sisters, a line was drawn in the sand 50 years into the fourth seal, a line was drawn in the sand, and it became palpably obvious that the truth was being lost rapidly. And these fellow servants, Laodicean Christadelphians, primitive Catholics, were waiting. And God had caused them to exist, yes. They were waiting for their champion. These fellow servants were waiting for Constantine, their champion. The brethren were waiting for their champion, who was Jesus Christ. And if you want just a little bit of proof here, you might like to just note, next to Revelation chapter 6 and verse 11, you might like to note Isaiah 13 and verse 3 and 17. Because in Isaiah 13 and verse 3, God calls the Medes and the Persians my sanctified ones. So in Isaiah 13 verse 3, my sanctified ones are the Medes and Persians. God has said, I've set them apart that they may conquer Babylon. These fellow servants you could call sanctified ones in order that they might conquer the pagan Roman Empire. Brothers and sisters, these fellow servants could not do what the brethren could do. These fellow servants who are waiting for their champion, who is Constantine, these fellow servants, these primitive Catholics, these Laodicean Christadelphians are going to go to war. They're going to fight. They're going to put on armour and literally fight with Constantine. God raised them up for that reason. So a line was drawn in the sand. So be aware there's a difference between them. They had a purpose. The brethren are going to be killed, and the fellow servants are going to be killed as they go forth and fight the pagan Roman world. What an amazing thing that we have those little statements in there showing that things are bad. A line was drawn in the sand, and you've got differences now in the ecclesia of God. The apostasy, the fellow servants, and the brethren, those that truly kept the doctrines of the Lord Jesus Christ. And as we draw our study, brothers and sisters, we end on an exhortational note as we draw our time together to a close. And yes, we're on time. Fantastic. So don't look at your watches, because I've already done it for you. Now, brothers and sisters, here we are, Revelation chapter 5 and verse 10. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true? Do you know, of all the times in the book of Revelation, the word Lord here, only here, is the Greek word despotes. They call God a despot. How long, O despot, wilt thou not avenge and judge our blood on those upon the earth? I want to show you tomorrow morning why they call God a despot. Of all the places in the book of Revelation, but they make a cry, brothers and sisters. And their cry went up to God. These are our brethren and sisters who watched all these years, looked at prophecy, and seen God and the angels at work. How would you cry to God if you lived there? How would a man pray, brothers and sisters and young people? A man who's dragged into that arena, strapped to poles with all of this wood laid at his feet and burnt alive, to the scream and adulation of the crowds. How would a man pray in an arena like that, as his body is burning to the spectacle and entertainment of these ungodly people? How would he pray? Would it be the sort of a prayer that halfway through he would fall asleep? How would a woman pray? A mother, a wife, a daughter, being dragged into that arena, knowing that she's not going to come out. She's not going to see her loved ones. She's going to face all of these beasts that are going to tear her fragile body limb from limb. She's not going to leave that place. How would she pray? Would it be the sort of a prayer that drifted up to God, and halfway through the prayer she would wander onto the mundane things of life? No, brothers and sisters. We're going to meet these brethren and sisters. We're going to stand next to them at the judgment seat. And they're going to say to you and me, how did you overcome? How did you overcome the awful persecution that's all they know? Those brethren and sisters know nothing about standing against those who will try to rob their hearts and minds from God. They know nothing else. And they'll say to you and me at the judgment seat, how did you overcome? How did you overcome the awful persecution that we know only happens to all brothers and sisters? What are we going to say? It was tough. Some of the studies in our ecclesia went 10 minutes over time. It was tough. It was tough. I went into the hall one day, and there was a brother there that said something nasty about me. He offended me. It was tough. There was a sister over there. She'd been gossiping about this. She hasn't got it. It was awful. Are we going to say that to our brothers and sisters?
we'll hang our heads in shame. I'm not saying we have to be dragged through the arena, brothers and sisters, but we have to stand firm for Christ and stand with our brothers and sisters. They cried, how long? And we're going to answer that question, God willing, tomorrow morning, brothers and sisters. God answers the prayers of the saints. And lo, there was a great earthquake.